The best way to talk about the Atlantic slave trade is to talk about it in numbers, and the numbers involved with it are staggering to say the least. From 1500 to 1880 CE, somewhere between 10 and 12 million people were kidnapped from their homes and shipped to the Americas to be bought into slavery. Only 15% of these people survived the brutal journey from Africa to the Americas, and those who did survive were bought like cattle once arrived there. Europeans had a long history of trading and importing slaves way before they began sending slaves to the Americas. The first real European slave trade began after the Fourth Crusades in 1204. One of the biggest misconceptions about slavery is that Europeans traveled down to Africa, rounded up slaves, chained them up, and brought them to the Americas. Africans were too powerful to just be overpowered by Europeans and shipped into slavery. In fact, Africans were usually captured by other Africans and traded to the Europeans into slavery. Once captured, the slaves were then put onto slave ships to be shipped to their final destinations. While on these slave ships, they were only given up to 4 square feet of room. That's right, 4 square feet. These slave ships could hold up to 400, but they were packed to their maximum capacity. It was once said by an Englishman that the slaves aboard the slave ship had not as much room as a man in his coffin. If the slaves survived these horrendous conditions, they were sold, bought, and branded as if they were cattle. Slaves did all kinds of work. Some did housework, some did craft work, and there were even some who were sailors. But the majority of slaves did agricultural jobs. In Brazil and the Caribbean, slaves worked farming things like tobacco and sugarcane. Jobs were as horrendous as having to carry up to 80 pounds of poop on their heads to fertilize the fields up and down hilly terrains. Because of the speed needed to harvest and process sugarcane quickly, slaves would work up to 48 hours straight with no rest or no food in the scalding heat trying to process the sugarcane. Often their hands and other limbs would get caught in the machinery while working. The solution to this? The overseers kept an axe or a hatchet on hand to perform quick amputations and cut off the caught up hands. With all the hardships and treacherous jobs in the slaves' lives, it's easy to see why the average life expectancy of a slave in Brazil and the Caribbean was only 23 years old. In the U.S., however, conditions were not as bad as those in the Caribbean and in Brazil. In turn, slave population grew more naturally, meaning that more slaves were being born than were dying. At its peak, slavery made up 30% of the U.S. population. Slave owners had finally figured out that if they kept their slaves just healthy enough for them to reproduce, then they did not have to buy slaves. Instead, they could use the children of the slaves they already had to work their land, and they could turn a profit by stealing and selling the slaves to other slave owners. So although the amount of slaves being shipped into the U.S. may have been small, the slave population grew rapidly. The thing that made Atlantic slavery so horrendous was that it was a form of slavery referred to as chattel slavery. Chattel slavery is whenever slaves are considered nothing more than movable, sellable property. Although slavery is a commonly misused word, slavery is if and only if a person is legally owned by another and is forced to obey said person. What makes slavery so horrendous is considered in this definition: the permanent, violent domination of natively alienated and generally dishonored persons. Basically, what makes slavery slavery is the dehumanizing of slaves. The Bible is often used to justify slavery because of the moment when Noah curses Ham. Noah says to him, "Cursed be Canaan, and the lowest of slaves shall he be to his brothers." This not only justifies slavery, but it perpetrates the idea that slavery could be a hereditary status passed down from generation to generation. Also, it sees slavery as a result of human sin. So although slavery seems so horrible and inconceivable to us today, slavery was very justified to those in the past. So in conclusion, Atlantic slavery was a tragedy, but it was a tragedy in which the whole world participated, and blaming one group exonerates all others. It culminated from generation after generation seeing one group of people as inherently less than themselves. The fact of the matter is that at one point in time, each one of our ancestors once believed it was okay to own another human being as property, and although that may not be how we saw today, it was clearly justified to them.